actually. You guys might have talked about this in a previous call, but has anyone read this yet? Belfry's book? Anyone?
Oh no, I didn't know you had
Not
one.
me.
It's phenomenal. It's a textbook basically. So I read a lot, and I'm on page 161, and usually I read about 2 books a week. That's taken me 2 weeks to get to 160 pages. It's very like if you're a skill development person, like if you like teaching skills, this is like the textbook on it. There's not a lot of how he works with like there is some like with how he works with the NHLers, like obviously Patrick Kane and all of that is in there, but it's I would say if you like love the details of teaching skill, it's by far the best book I've read. It doesn't have his drills in it. It has how he teaches it. Like I said, it's like a textbook.
I hear he's teaching or he's doing some Zoom classes himself on Monday nights and whatnot. I like his innovation. Where I am a little bit of a critic with regard to Belfry is that his jargon, his use of language is confusing. So he uses all these sort of quasi motor development type of terms, and they're really inconsistent. So I kind of get lost in that a little bit with his stuff, but I do appreciate obviously his innovation and the work that he's done with some elite players. But that's my critique with his work so far.
Yeah, he tries to go through that in the book. Like he talks about, he's obviously, very academically focused, and he tries to go through how he's developed that vocabulary. I agree. I find some inconsistencies here, like throughout the whole book. But the concepts I think are solid in terms of what he's trying to convey. And the idea of blending skills. I'm thinking about how I have to develop a skill curriculum for my association or our high level teams, and the Hockey Canada version sure doesn't cut it, nor does the USA Hockey version. Like in actually getting coaches to implement it. But this is talking more about the verbiage that people could use to teach the actual skill. So to your point, Malcolm, if I'm doing it with an association, it would have to be a lot more consistent than how he is in that book. But it's very much on the teaching side of skill. It has very little on the actual skills itself. So it's interesting. I haven't read a book like this for hockey, so it does have that difference factor that is interesting. And I think someone asked a couple of weeks ago about Colgate, and his daughter's going to Colgate, and she's a heck of a D. Anyways, it's a great read. It's very dense. It's not something you can just read casually. You definitely be taking notes. So, anyways, that's what I wanted to share.
He's a pretty interesting guy. Like, know if you guys all know his story, but he was kind of a player at University of Ottawa, and I think Mickey Goulet asked him, after his second year or something, well, do you want to help coach? And he said, well, yeah, sure. And he just sort of did all this just on his own, just watching NHL games, and he'd be like, oh man, how did that guy do that? And he'd watch the video, slow it down, and he just pieced a lot of his stuff together all by himself, which is pretty incredible. And he does have some creative ways of both teaching, but creative ways of looking at the game as well. He's pretty amazing. I had the chance to work with him a couple of times at Hockey Canada camps, and just an interesting guy and an interesting story, really interesting story.
I like the story that he came from sort of unconventional direction and is influencing the game. I think that's something that we don't see a lot of. We don't see an external influence. It's always internal, and we tend to get caught up in the old pathways. So he's innovating that way for sure, bringing a new set of eyes and new emphasis on skill development stuff. one of the things that I did see that he was talking about is he calls it bridging, and it's allowing skill development for a player where maybe they're not executing a specific skill, and so he tries to make a shortcut in executing and using another movement pattern, and that's something that I haven't seen very much being talked about in even the scientific literature. It's always about break skill analysis and then breaking the skill down and then reshaping it and maybe adapting to a different biomechanical pattern because someone's really big or really small or something like that. So this idea of bridging that he's talked about, I think he talks about it in the book, although I haven't read it, is quite an interesting idea. And his description of that is that it allows them to perform before they can address the skill deficit. So it allows the player to continue to perform without a deficit in their performance. So I think that's kind of a cool idea.
Mm.
Yeah, he talks about it a lot in the book. He doesn't give a ton of specific examples. So I think, I think the people on this call would be able to insert an example there. I think if you're maybe a less experienced hockey person, it would be hard for you to figure out what that might be. I was thinking of, like I call it heel to heel, the Crosby move, the open, toes out pivot. And I know a lot of players kind of struggle with implementing that in their game. And, so how that's kind of like a T push and that sort of thing. The bridging, I think we would typically call that like a regression or a progression, based on someone's ability. But it is an interesting concept. I think that's what his next webinar is on, isn't it, Malcolm?
Yeah, that's where I saw it, and then it sort of piqued my interest. So I started to look through a couple books on that idea. So
I love the idea of like our goalie coach, who I know a bunch of Sandy Sampson. He never played goalie, and parents here in Toronto love to give him hell for that. His son played college hockey at, I think it's New England College. So once his son started playing hockey, he learned how to play goalie by watching goalie practices and trying to figure it out. And I do think, I would say I played at a high level, but I wasn't a highly skilled person. So when I teach skill, thank you, Peter, for the laugh. It's true. But I come through a lot of the skating stuff. I wasn't a very good technical skater because I just didn't take a lot of power skating. I was very good in like linear, but not east-west. And so I find when I teach that stuff, I'm actually way better at teaching that stuff than I am like quick release shooting, which is probably what I was best at. So it's interesting that if you're not elite at something or you don't have that elite level experience, you might actually be a better teacher of it. At least that's what I find in my hockey school experience. So I think it's awesome that he's not played at what a lot of people would consider elite level, I guess, on the men's side. He doesn't talk about his playing at all. Actually, if you read the book and you didn't know, you'd think he never played, like ever. So I don't know if that's a sales tactic, but that's he comes from it as if he's like a complete beginner, which I think is neat.
Tim, I got a question. You work with him. What did you feel that was unique about what he did that you might have taken away?
Well, I don't know. It's just a lot of his concepts and just it's the simple breaking down of the skills, the awareness of things, but creating space for yourself. It's not something like that. That just saying to somebody you want to try to create space for yourself is not. It's a different way of thinking or looking at it. Not something like that I'd ever really thought about consciously as a player or a coach. Of course, that's kind of what we all want to do in some ways, but just and the ways to do that, just like really simple things. instead of attacking down the wall all the time, coming through the neutral zone, which is what everybody does. And now this is old hat, but trying to get to the middle of the ice or attack the dot line instead of down the wall. So you've got you've got space for yourself, like just stuff like that. Just is sort of the way he thinks through the game in terms of how to create offense is really pretty interesting.
I had my major takeaway was how he added to conventional drills, and maybe people were doing this before, but he's the first person I've ever seen do a 3-man weave with more than one puck.
Herb Brooks, 1980.
Yeah, well, I wasn't aware of that, but he's the first time I saw him do it just with a small number of players on the ice. And I don't know, but in terms of individual skill, he really does some out of the comfort zone kinds of things that are really effective. So that's my main takeaway of him. He's sure a popular guy, but watching the playoffs, you always are looking at who's working with who and who's playing the best, and sort of the benchmark is the teams that perform well. And what the heck are those people doing? But Darryl's really, making a name for himself and creating his own enterprise, and it's really good because he's different. Mm-hmm. And I think that's sort of the most important thing here is we've done things the same way for so many years that the different thinkers like him and others coming up are ones that are going to make a big difference. I'm curious about Brad Moran. Brad, have you heard of him at all?
Is Brad Sorry, even... Wally, I'm just driving. I'm trying to figure it out here. Just jumped on, so I'm just kind of catching here, trying to catch up.
Well, Wally, you.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead and finish, Brad, if you had a thought there.
No, I just thinking outside the box. I'm just trying to figure out what you guys are on here, and it sounds pretty interesting.
And we're talking about Darryl Belfry and his skill development stuff. Yeah, Kim is reading his book right now, which I wasn't aware he was on. So kind of.
Okay, that's odd because I was thinking that before I jumped on about him and how he shuts off the videos, and I was going to actually call a guy here that I know sent his kid to one of the things in Calgary here and just try and get some feedback. So good timing, kind of weird coincidence there.
I'd like to share one thing that I did 30 years ago that I still do, and it's not Darryl Belfry-ish or whatever you want to call it, but just having somebody handle a puck with the wrong hand, just switch hands, and then going back to normal in terms of the immediate feel and impact of it. For me, that's been just a major thing in terms of the muscles and the nerve systems and going back to normal. And I don't know whether it's psychological because you're so uncomfortable with the wrong hands, but that's sort of that kind of thinking where doing different things like that can have a real big physiological effect. And I brought up before and I don't know which podcast it was, but Darryl and Patrick Kane and 2 or 3 other really advanced players look at video and talk about what they were thinking. And I think with Zoomerverse, Kim, and I don't know to what degree the girls would get into the tactical thinking, looking at video, but what those players are doing on the ice today, I just can't imagine the speed of their minds. playoffs last night, and I'm pretty excited about it. And I sent a text out, I think, to most of you about being on Skype, and it was good to see the hockey. And I don't know, Kim, I'm still perplexed where girls can get excited about this when they're watching guys all the time who are really skilled, and we're trying to get them to sort of take hold and appreciate it and learn from it. But